Howdy, folks. It is Scanner here. I'm on a break from painting my kitchen to talk to you about something I've avoided on the channel really since we set it up. Because since we started covering Trench Crusade. This has been one of the topics that comes up all the time. Everybody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants speculation. Everybody wants to know what it is. And it never made sense to do it up until now. We're not too far away from the rule book. My understanding of things from statements Tuomas has made publicly is that there'll be information on the Metacrists in the rulebook, in the lore sections. So I don't mind speculating on what it is now. I don't mind being wrong. I don't necessarily want to start something that carries on forever within the community, though. I just want to speculate and have some fun, and then in a few weeks, the rulebook will be out and it will dismiss everything I've said. So that's fine by me. The other thing I want to say before we get stuck into it is that I've noticed that the idea of Metacrists is something that makes people particularly rowdy on social media, especially people who don't like Trench Crusade very much. And that's cool. Like, you do you. It's a game, guys. It's a fucking game. So I talk about it as if it is a game. I've had a couple of people kind of being silly in the comment sections lately because they don't understand I'm talking about a game or something, and I need to explain to them that it is a game that I'm talking about here. So it's a game, is all I'm going to say. So let's talk about Metacrists. What we know about Metacrists. These are things that 100% exist in the Trench Crusade universe. They're not a spiritual concept. They're not an offshoot of the Abrahamic religions. They're not idols. They're not replacements for Christ or anything like that. They're nothing that comes up in the real world. There's no real such thing as a Metachrist. But we'll get more into that later. But these are basically just clones of Jesus. They're not things that replace Jesus for the church or anything like that. They're not worshipped as a replacement for Christ. Except, and this is where things get a little sketchy, some pilgrims will worship a particular Metachrist, the seventh Metachrist, because the seventh Metachrist brings back penitent martyrs, and stigmatic nuns worship the third Metachrist, because the third Metachrist appears to be the one who gives them their stigmatic wounds and makes them, tank damage, basically. Now, how exactly you wish to interpret that worship is entirely up to you, and it's going to have to be up to you. You could consider it to be a form of idolatry and something that the church wouldn't have any truck with. For me, it really depends on the nature of that worship. I don't necessarily see them as worshipping something that's a replacement of Christ. I see them worshipping a function of Christ, if that makes sense, in universe. We just don't know enough about it at this point. I kind of see them as worshipping an extension of Christ. But stigmatic nuns are also kind of nutty and dangerous in universe to everything around them. So they're not exactly an upstanding, like, this is what Christianity is supposed to be group at the best of times. So there appears to have been at least 7 Metachrists. They are used to derive what could be considered the body and blood of Christ for use in a process called the communicant process. I'm going to assume you have some kind of knowledge of what that is, where basically it's the feeding of the body and blood of the Metachrists to willing and sometimes unwilling communicants, as they are called, and they become big and strong and scary and crazy. The best examples of those would be the Paladins. Those are near perfect subjects receiving near perfect communion, and there was 12 of them. There's 9 now. 3 of them are missing. 1 is supposedly dead, or 2 are supposedly dead. 1 is supposedly turned traitor. Who knows? And there does appear to be a limit on yield or effectiveness from this process. What we don't know if this is due to the limitations of human beings. As we know, a lot of people get kind of, messed up and beyond function by the communicant process. You've got things like the red communicants, who are canon of the Red Brigade, who are not all right by any means. Or it could also be down to the process to create the Metacrists themselves. Basically, there can be a lot of things that goes wrong without the thing that going wrong necessarily being the body and blood of the Metachrist itself. And then, of course, that could also be the problem. So, the process was developed by the Mandalist Order, which we've discussed before in this very specific series and on this channel. We don't know a huge amount as to what it is that they do or how it is they go about this process, other than, like, you know, it's a clear reference to Gregor Mendel. That's going to be important. We'll come back to that in a minute, whom we've discussed a lot in previous installments. So, in the setting, given that it would appear that Jesus really did come to Earth, lived a life, was crucified, was buried, and rose again after 3 days, it would seem plausible that the church has managed to locate artifacts with DNA on them. We can kind of assume that that's how it is they came across the DNA of Christ. It could be something like the Spear of Longinus, or the Holy Lance as it's called, that was used to pierce Christ's side as he hung on the cross. It could be the Holy Nails, which some people claim were found by Constantine the Great, along with the true cross, which is the actual cross that Jesus was supposedly hung on in Jerusalem in the 4th century, if that is something that happened in the Trench Crusade universe. It could be the Shroud of Turin, which many people believe is the burial shroud of Christ. Basically, even within established Christian doctrine, there's arguments to be made that there's opportunity to retrieve the DNA of what was the human host of Christ's spirit during his time on Earth. The only thing we really know about the process is that it's imperfect. And we know it's imperfect because it does not create actual clones of Christ, but instead it creates a material body that is a source of flesh and blood for the communicant process. We know that this blood and flesh is capable of having an effect on humans, we can assume, through impacting DNA. This is not always a stable process, and also seems to create some degree of mental instability. See things like the red communicants or normal communicants that nail shit to their face. So the result is not always universal either, because you have various different types of communicants, and then you've also got the berserkers from Era. That's not really a standard communicant result, but it is a reaction to the communicant process, which is kind of interesting. And that's considered to be a latent trait. That's an unsought for trait, basically, out of the communicant process. It's not what they were looking to happen, but it's just what happened, which is interesting. So, Metacrists are not universally accepted in the world of Trench Crusade. Really good example of that is the Cavalcade of the 10th Plague. They kind of deem them to be blasphemous. They don't fuck with the teachings of the Metachrist, and they consider them to be sinful. And if they come across a communicant, they will basically deem them to be originating in sin, and they will need to work that off basically for the Lord. I don't really know how else to say it. We also have the following mention of the second Metachrist, and this one's quite interesting. The Metachrist did cut its flesh and gave it to the disciples. Its ruined mouth could not form the words, but it grunted noises that the Mandalist monk translated as "Take, eat, this is my body." And the Metachrist did leak blood from its eyes and mouth, which the Mandalist monk caught in a chalice, once again translating the Metachrist's painful noises. "Drink ye all of it." Now, let's get into theory time. And this is the real fun. So, my theory is that the Mandalist monks are capable of failing to clone Christ, basically. They end up with a body, and the body that they are cloning is somewhat divine. If we assume Immaculate Conception, then it still gives a reasonable success window with regard to physical function, right? It's not what they want, but there's a benefit to doing it. That's why they do it. Where the failure seems almost complete is that they can't clone the spirit or soul of Christ. That said, housing the soul of an actual god could potentially have had some form of genetic imprint on the DNA of Christ's original body, and they misinterpret that psychic memory as proposed function. Bear with me. In Matthew 26, 29, Jesus takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, eat, this is my body." He then takes a cup, gives thanks, and says, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." So, an echoing of what this Metachrist, this second Metachrist, seems to be doing, is attempting to give the body and the blood. It's incredibly literal, obviously, but that's what I mean. We see this as an echo, basically, of the previous statements for the second Metachrist. That's assuming that the Mandalist monk is actually legitimately capable of understanding the Metachrist's words, and that the translation is literal, rather than just the Mandalist monk assuming that that is what the Metachrist is saying, or implying it because that's what they want it to be saying. An important line that is mentioned in the book of the rules for Trench Crusade is a Bible quote from Trench Crusade's version of the Bible, but it's not the real version of the Bible, and this is not a real book from the real Bible. This is called Divinations 12:9, and it says, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and no sign shall be given unto it but the sign of the Metachrist." I'm going to tie all this together, bear with me. This could be taken to mean that a bunch of lazy fucks are looking for meaning in their seemingly pointless lives, and the Metachrist is about to give them a whole bunch of meaning that they're not going to like, because the Metachrists, whilst broken and beleaguered clones and flawed simulacrum of a divinity that they can never hope to replicate, are capable of accessing the code of reality and essentially changing the rules. We don't know how broad this skill set is, but it's the most important aspects of the Metachrist within the game state and the lore state, and there are some clues. The seventh Metachrist brings back martyr penitence, not mentioned in any other capacity other than doing that as the divine function. It's very specific, as if that is the ability that it's found itself with, that this is the element of the Godhead that it has access to, so that's the one that it exercises. We can assume that producing Metacrists takes time, effort, money, resources, and likely comes with a degree of risk, as risk is almost the defining element of the world of Trench Crusade. If one was enough, then it kind of feels like the church would have made one, maybe up to 3, for redundancy purposes. You always want a spare Metachrist, basically, am I right? And even that would be incredibly ridiculously risky. As such, even though the process itself is risky, we can assume the risk is somewhat mitigated by the inherent failure of the process itself and the apparent limitations of the Metachrists. These imperfect clones appear to be mostly unintelligible. If the Mandalist monk is capable of understanding them, that doesn't mean anybody else is. It doesn't mean the Mandalist monk can even directly understand them, as I've said. It translate could mean that's what they want it to mean, not what it actually means. So that's kind of a built-in fail-safe, that the Metachrist can't be easily manipulated. If you can't understand and communicate, you can't foster ideas in something. It feels like the abilities of the Metachrists are limited, because they made up to 7 of them that we know of. 7 different entities that can essentially alter reality in a small to large way through their own access to divinity would be insane levels of risk. And effectively, you'd leave the laws of physics open for rewriting. Even if you had all the faith in the world in Christ, in God, in the Holy Spirit, in the teachings of Christianity, in your Abrahamic religion, it would still be insanely risky to clone 7 things with divine power if those divine powers were not in some way limited. And that's what I feel very strongly is the case here, that the Metachrists can do a single individual Christly function. So, as I said, it strongly seems like the Metachrists have one thing that they can do, and this might even be a cheeky reference to the law of segregation by Gregor Mendel? I don't know. And that the creation of the Metachrist is like a lottery. You don't know what ability they're going to have. Out of the 7 Metachrists, we know of 3, and all 3 appear to have a function, potentially. The second appears to offer blood and flesh for the communicant process. We don't know, nor is it ever stated, that every Metachrist gives up blood and flesh for the process. Perhaps this is a self-replicating Metachrist that's capable of doing it. We don't know yet if the others do, or if they are harvested against their will, or anything like that. But we know that the second one appears to be involved in that process. The third appears to be the one that inflicts the stigmata on the nuns. The 7th is the one that resurrects fallen warriors and makes them martyr penitents. That leaves 4 that potentially have any of the following possibilities attached. A useless function. B, an unknown function. C, a dangerous function. Or D, no actual function. They just don't work in the way that these other ones do. The church could have made more Metacrists, we don't know. And it could be making more actively to try and get access to other functions. Given how technologically advanced the church is in Trench Crusade, keep in mind the church in Trench Crusade is more technologically advanced in many ways than we are in the real world right now when it comes to very specific sciences. So they could be interpreting anything that they can develop technologically as being a gift from God. That could be something that they've decided within the church. It is possible that they directly interpret their ability to make Metachrists as being something that occurs only with God's approval and a sign of his direct intervention in the war. And they might be planning to just keep rolling the dice on what these abilities are until they acquire the function that they need to win. Now, here's some food for thought. Despite the ability to clone stuff in the Trench Crusade universe, we know it's something they can do. It's science that they've cracked. There's no real mention of it in any other aspects of life in Trench Crusade. People, just normal people, no matter how good they are, they don't seem to be worth cloning. And from this, I choose to assume that it's not cost effective and that the result itself is not desirable. I think that the cloned people have no soul. I think you cannot drag a soul back to the physical body just because you've cloned that physical body or that physical body exists in another form. I think that's exactly the same with the Metacrists, but things get more odd due to the nature of divinity. I think that they can clone those bodies, and perhaps because of some kind of hardwired genetic memory, scrambled by the process, or just a means of channeling a small part of God, or it might even be God's intended purpose. Maybe Christ wants to help, and that's all that he can actually do. It doesn't matter what it boils down to, but they have a reason for doing it specifically with the Metacrists that they don't have for doing it with anybody else. And I think the reason why it's worth doing with the Metacrists is because of that divine ability. And that they have no idea what the divine ability is going to be. They don't know how to take advantage of it until it manifests. And when it does manifest, it could be useless or dangerous or crazy. That's my take on Metacrists. I have no idea if that is true or anything like that. One thing I will say is I was recently having a chat with Tuomas, and it was a fun conversation. And it became very apparent over the course of that conversation that even I have been thinking very small scale sometimes in what Trench Crusade can be. And I'm always limiting the potential of man in Trench Crusade. I'm willing to go big, but I'm not willing to go as big as I think the devs are willing to go. Where structures can just be enormous. Like, sense is out the window. I don't know why everybody keeps trying to bring sense to the Trench Crusade conversation when it's entirely a world that has abandoned the concept of sense. Ridiculousness rules the day. So I'm starting to feel like the most ridiculous theory around Metacrists will be correct. And I think my theory is pretty ridiculous, but I don't think it's going to be the correct one. I'm having some fun. It's a thought exercise. You folks know I like those. Now, as I said, I know that some people can get rowdy about this particular topic. I don't think this is any kind of a commentary on the second coming or anything like that. Eschatologists can relax and not fret about it. I'm just like theory crafting here. I don't need people to come into my comment section and actually me when I'm talking about a game. And I'm trying to limit as much as I can my conversations to the game, specifically to avoid potentially insulting someone's personal faith and beliefs. But ultimately, they're your personal faith and beliefs. You don't have to worry about what the rest of us might think, one way or the other. But anyway, that's it for Metacrists. This one was a huge amount of fun to think about. So let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. And I will talk to you real soon. Thank you so much for watching, folks. Goodbye.